There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that retrospectively become the fulcrum upon which your entire world tilts. They are never announced with trumpets or a roll of drums. They slip in quietly, wearing the drab coat of a Tuesday evening, a shared pizza, a conversation that feels like 100 others you have had before. And then a single sentence, a subtle shift in the air, a look held a fraction of a second too long, and the entire landscape of your existence is redrawn. The foundation you thought was solid rock reveals itself to have been sand all along, and you are left standing in the quiet aftermath, trying to remember what the world looked like before the tide came in. For me, that moment was not a grand cataclysm. It was a question whispered into the charged space of my own hallway, a question that had the weight of an anchor and the terrifying lightness of a feather. He had backed me into the corner, not with aggression, but with the slow, inexorable gravity he always seemed to possess. Alex was a celestial body, and I was just a satellite caught in his orbit, a fact I had made my peace with years ago. My back was pressed against the cool plaster of the wall next to my apartment door, the keys still dangling from my numb fingers. The overhead light cast his face in a dramatic chiaroscuro, carving hollows beneath his cheekbones and making his eyes seem like dark, bottomless pools. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a familiar, comforting heat that had suddenly become a five-alarm fire against my skin. His scent, a mix of the crisp outdoor air from his walk over and the faint, clean fragrance of his laundry detergent, filled my senses, short-circuiting my brain. He leaned in, one hand coming up to brace against the wall beside my head, caging me in a way that was not threatening, but was undeniably deliberate. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, a physical presence between us. And then, his voice, a low rumble that vibrated through my chest, broke it. "Do I make you nervous, Leo?" The question hung there, a perfect, shimmering sphere of vulnerability and challenge. It was not an accusation. It was not a joke. It was genuine curiosity, laced with something else, something I could not name but felt in the deepest marrow of my bones. It was a door pushed ajar, inviting me to either slam it shut or step across the threshold into an unknown country. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild bird beating its wings against a cage. Every rational thought I possessed had fled, leaving only a raw, humming awareness of him, of his proximity, of the years of unspoken things that suddenly felt deafeningly loud in the quiet of the hallway. I could not answer. I could only stare into his eyes, feeling as though he were seeing straight through my carefully constructed walls, right into the messy, secret-filled room where I had hidden my heart. To understand the sheer, seismic power of that question, you have to understand the geography of our friendship. Alex and I were an unlikely pair, a study in contrast that somehow found a perfect, interlocking harmony. We met in college, thrown together by the arbitrary lottery of a freshman seminar on European history. He was the sun, and I was the shade. He sat in the front row, all bright energy and easy confidence, engaging the professor in lively debates, his laughter echoing in the cavernous lecture hall. He was a business major, a forward on the soccer team, a person who moved through the world with an assumption of welcome. I, on the other hand, was a creature of the back row, a quiet photography student who saw the world through a viewfinder, more comfortable capturing moments than participating in them. I observed. I documented. I lived in the periphery, finding beauty in the overlooked details, in the interplay of light and shadow on a face, in the silent stories told by a person's hands. Our friendship began not with a bang, but with a quiet, persistent gravitational pull. He noticed me, which was in itself a minor miracle. He noticed the way I was always sketching in a small black notebook, the way I'd linger after class to capture the geometric patterns the late afternoon sun threw across the empty chairs. He started with a simple, "Hey, what are you drawing?" One day, he asked to see my photos. I was hesitant, protective of the fragile worlds I created. My photography was my internal monologue made visible, a language I felt no one else could truly understand. But there was a genuine curiosity in his eyes, an absence of judgment that made me, against my better judgment, say yes. I showed him a series I was working on, black and white shots of the campus at dawn, empty and serene, stripped of all its bustling energy. It was a study in loneliness, I suppose, though I never would have called it that. He did not say the things most people said. He did not comment on the technical skill or ask about my camera settings. He was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving from one print to another, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Then he looked at me, a soft, thoughtful look on his face, and said, "It feels peaceful. Like you found the world's off switch." He understood. He did not just see the images. He felt the intention behind them. He felt the silence I was trying to capture. In that moment, a bond was forged, a silent understanding that went deeper than casual acquaintance. He saw me, the real me, the one hiding behind the lens and the quiet demeanor. And I, in turn, began to see him not just as the popular, charismatic athlete, but as someone with his own quiet depths, his own unvoiced narratives. Our friendship solidified over the next 4 years, becoming a cornerstone of my college experience. We were a constant in each other's lives. He would drag me to parties, introducing me with a proud arm slung around my shoulders, creating a protective bubble for me amidst the noise and chaos. I would be the one he came to when he needed to escape that same noise, when the pressure of his life, the expectations, the competition, the relentless forward momentum became too much. He would sprawl on the floor of my dorm room, surrounded by my developing trays and the faint, sharp scent of fixer, and just be silent. We could sit in a room together for hours without speaking, him staring at the ceiling, me editing photos, and the silence was never empty. It was a comfortable, shared space, a sanctuary. He was the only person with whom silence felt like a conversation. It was somewhere in the middle of all that, in the quiet moments and the loud ones, in the shared pizzas and late-night study sessions, that I fell in love with him. It was not a sudden, dramatic fall. It was a slow, gentle erosion, like water carving a canyon. It was in the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he truly smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that was different from his public, charming grin. It was in the way he'd absent-mindedly play with the worn leather strap of my camera, his fingers tracing the patterns. It was in the fierce loyalty he showed me, defending my artistic choices to his skeptical business major friends, always taking my side without question. I loved him for his boisterous energy, and I loved him for the quiet, thoughtful man he was when that energy was spent. But I was a master of self-preservation. My feelings were a collection of rare, fragile glass objects that I kept locked away in a hidden room of my heart. I knew the score. Alex was a whirlwind of fleeting romantic entanglements, a string of beautiful, vivacious girlfriends who were as bright and sunny as he was. He was, by all accounts and by his own admission, straight. Our friendship was a precious, unique thing, a perfectly balanced ecosystem. To introduce my feelings into it would be like introducing an invasive species. It would choke the life out of everything, destroying the delicate balance we had built. The risk was too great. The potential loss was catastrophic. So, I became an expert curator of my own emotions. I packed them away, labeled them "Do Not Open," and built my life around the careful maintenance of our platonic bond. I learned to live with the quiet ache in my chest, the low, constant hum of longing that became the background music of my life. It was a price I was willing to pay to keep him in it. After graduation, our lives diverged in practice, but not in spirit. I stayed in the city, slowly building a career as a freelance photographer, finding my niche in architectural and portrait work. Alex, with his prestigious business degree, was snapped up by a top-tier consulting firm. His job was demanding, a life lived out of a suitcase. He was constantly on the move, flying from one city to another, putting out fires, charming clients, living up to the golden boy reputation that had followed him since college. We stayed in touch, our friendship adapting to the new reality of distance. Our long, silent evenings were replaced by late-night phone calls from sterile hotel rooms, his voice weary, but always happy to hear mine. He would tell me about his projects, the corporate jargon of foreign language to me, but I would listen, hearing the stress underneath the bravado. I would tell him about my shoots, about the way the light hit a particular building, and I could almost feel him relax through the phone line. My apartment became his unofficial home base, the one stable point in his chaotic, transient life. Whenever he had a day or two between trips, he would land on my doorstep, duffel bag in hand, a tired but relieved smile on his face. Thought I'd crash here. If that's cool, he'd say, though it was never a question. It was a given. My home was his home. He was the only person who had a key, a fact that felt both wonderfully intimate and deeply dangerous. He would shed his corporate skin the moment he walked through the door, trading his suit for a pair of my old sweatpants, his polished shoes for bare feet on my worn wooden floors. He would collapse onto my couch, and I would bring him a beer or make him tea, and we would slip back into our old, comfortable rhythm, the years and the miles melting away as if they had never existed. The shift began subtly, so subtly that at first, I dismissed it as a product of my own wishful thinking. It was a change in the weather of our relationship, a gradual drop in atmospheric pressure that hinted at a coming storm. The catalyst was his job. The relentless pace, which had once energized him, began to wear him down. The bright, confident light in his eyes started to flicker. He was burning out. The phone calls from hotel rooms became more frequent, the silences longer, laden with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He talked less about the challenges of his work and more about the crushing sameness of it all, the identical hotel rooms, the bland airport lounges, the superficial conversations. He was lonely. It was a word he never used, but I could hear it in the hollow spaces between his words. He was a man designed for connection, for community, and his life had become a series of temporary, meaningless interactions. His visits to my apartment began to change. Before, they were a joyful respite, a chance to recharge. Now, they felt more like a desperate search for sanctuary. He would arrive looking frayed at the edges, the vibrant energy that was his trademark dimmed to a low pilot light. The easy laughter was harder to coax out. He was more withdrawn, more prone to long stretches of brooding silence that felt different from our old, comfortable quiet. This silence was heavy, filled with an unspoken anxiety. He started seeking a different kind of comfort from me, a comfort that began to blur the carefully drawn lines of our friendship. It was a slow, creeping escalation of intimacy, each step so small that it could be easily explained away, easily denied. But taken together, they formed a pattern, a new map of our relationship that was leading us into uncharted territory. It started with the couch. For years, the couch had been his designated spot. He would crash there, wrapped in a blanket I kept specifically for him, and I would sleep in my own bed down the hall. It was a clear, unspoken boundary. One night, he arrived later than usual, looking utterly depleted. A big project had gone south, and he had spent the last 48 hours in damage control. He slumped onto the sofa, barely speaking, and I left him there, assuming he would fall asleep. A few hours later, I woke to a sound from the living room. I found him sitting up, rubbing his neck, his face etched with pain in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the window. "This couch is killing my back," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep and exhaustion. It was a simple statement of fact, a complaint. But then he looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Leo, would it be weird? Is your bed big enough for two?" My heart stopped. The air in the room became thin, hard to breathe. This was it. A line. A clear, undeniable line. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to say no, to make an excuse, to protect the fragile ecosystem of our friendship. I could offer him my bed and take the couch myself. That would be the safe, sensible thing to do. But looking at his exhausted, vulnerable face, at the deep, dark circles under his eyes, the word no died on my lips. He looked broken. All he was asking for was a comfortable place to sleep. It was not a proposition. It was a plea for comfort from a man who was at the end of his rope. To deny him would have felt cruel. And so, ignoring the frantic alarm bells in my head, I heard myself say, "Yeah, it's fine. Come on." That first night was a study in exquisite torture. I lay on the far edge of my queen-sized mattress, my body rigid, every muscle tensed. I tried to make myself as small as possible, to take up the least amount of space. I could feel his presence beside me like a furnace, his body heat radiating across the small gulf of mattress between us. I listened to the sound of his breathing, the slow, deep rhythm as he finally succumbed to an exhausted sleep. I was hyper-aware of everything. The subtle shift of the mattress as he moved, the scent of his skin, the sheer, overwhelming fact of his physical presence in my most private space. I did not sleep at all. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of panic and a terrifying, treacherous hope. I told myself it was a one-time thing, an anomaly, a necessity born of a bad couch and a bad day. But it was not a one-time thing. It became the new normal. The couch was tacitly retired. Whenever he stayed over, it was simply assumed he would share my bed. The pretext of his bad back was mentioned once or twice more, and then forgotten, no longer necessary. A ritual was established, a new, unspoken agreement. And with each night, the careful, rigid boundaries I had tried to maintain on that first night began to dissolve. The gulf of mattress between us shrank. One night, I woke up to find his arm thrown across my chest, his hand resting just over my heart. I lay there, frozen, for what felt like hours, feeling the weight of his arm, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing against my side. I should have moved. I should have gently extricated myself, but I could not bring myself to do it. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, a profound and deeply longed-for connection. I just lay there, soaking in the contraband closeness, my heart aching with a feeling so immense it felt like it might break me. The physicality became more commonplace, more casual, but it never lost its electric charge for me. He was a tactile person by nature, but this was different. It was a possessive, almost unconscious claiming of space and comfort. He would fall asleep with his head on my shoulder, or with his leg tangled with mine. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would shift and pull me closer, his body molding against my back, his arm wrapping around my waist, as if seeking an anchor in the dark. In his sleep, he was unguarded, his actions driven by pure, unthinking instinct. And his instincts, it seemed, were to be as close to me as possible. During the day, we would revert to our old dynamic, the easy camaraderie of best friends. We would talk, laugh, watch movies. But as night approached, a quiet tension would build, an unspoken anticipation of the intimacy that awaited us in the dark. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade anxiety and dizzying hope. I was an archaeologist carefully excavating a fragile, priceless artifact. Every touch, every unconscious murmur in his sleep, every shared breath in the dark was a shard of evidence to be examined, analyzed, and cataloged. What did it mean? Was this just an extension of our friendship, a new level of platonic comfort born of his loneliness and my willingness to provide a safe harbor? Or was it something more? Was it possible that his feelings were shifting, that the lines were blurring for him, too? I swung wildly between these two possibilities. One moment, I was convinced I was just a human security blanket to him, a convenient source of warmth and comfort with no romantic implications. The next, a particularly lingering look or a gentle touch would send my hopes soaring, and I would allow myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was leading somewhere. The ambiguity was maddening. I was living in a liminal space, a house with all the doors left ajar. I was terrified to ask, to seek clarification, because I knew that giving a name to what was happening between us would force a choice. It would shatter the delicate, fragile bubble of plausible deniability we had built around ourselves. If I asked, "What are we doing?" and his answer was, "What do you mean? We're friends," the humiliation would be unbearable. The shared bed, the nightly cuddling, all of it would be recast in a harsh, pathetic light. I would be exposed as the one who wanted more, the one who had misinterpreted everything. The friendship, the real, solid thing we had, would be irrevocably damaged. And so, I said nothing. I lived inside the question, hoarding the small moments of intimacy like a miser, analyzing them in the dark, trying to divine their meaning, terrified of the answer. I chose the torment of uncertainty over the risk of a devastating truth. I continued to be his sanctuary, his anchor, his warm body in the dark, all the while my own heart was quietly breaking with the weight of everything I could not say. The ritual of our shared nights became a complex tapestry woven from comfort and anxiety. My bedroom, once my solitary refuge, transformed into a shared territory, a space charged with unspoken possibilities. I learned the cartography of his sleeping form with the same intimacy I had once reserved for the landscapes I photographed. I knew the way a lock of his dark hair would fall across his forehead, the exact cadence of his breathing as it deepened into sleep, the way his hand would sometimes twitch, as if he were playing a piano in his dreams. These were details I collected, precious and dangerous, stored in the ever-expanding library of my secret affection for him. Each night was a tightrope walk over a canyon of yearning. I would lie beside him, my body a taut wire of awareness, cataloging every point of contact, every accidental brush of skin. The rational part of my brain insisted it meant nothing, that this was just Alex, a creature of casual physicality, seeking solace in the most straightforward way he knew how. But the hopeful, foolish part of my heart saw intention in every gesture, a silent language of affection that he was speaking, perhaps unconsciously. One evening, the tension that usually settled in as night felt different. It was sharper, more palpable. Alex had been home for a week straight, a rare extended break between projects. The time together had been both wonderful and excruciating. The domesticity of it felt dangerously real. We fell into a rhythm that mimicked a life I had only ever allowed myself to dream of. We shopped for groceries together, we cooked meals, we existed in the shared space of my small apartment with an ease that felt both perfectly natural and utterly terrifying. He seemed to be shedding the last remnants of his road-weary persona, the easy confidence replaced by a quieter, more introspective mood. He would watch me as I worked, editing photos at my desk, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch on the back of my neck. When I would turn to look at him, he would quickly look away, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. Something was shifting. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, trembling with the prelude to an earthquake. That night, we were on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. The credits rolled, and the living room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. He did not make his usual move to get up and head to the bedroom. He just sat there, staring at the blank television screen, his body angled towards me. I could feel the heat of his thigh pressed against mine. The air grew thick, charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. I felt a primal urge to flee, to put distance between us and break the spell, but I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the sheer force of the unspoken thing that was crackling in the space between us. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding mine in the dim light. His expression was one I had never seen before. It was a raw mix of confusion, fear, and a startling, profound vulnerability. The easygoing mask of Alex was gone, and in his place was a man I barely recognized, a man who looked as lost and terrified as I felt. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, his jaw tight. It was in that moment that I knew. This was it. The culmination of all the shared nights, the unspoken touches, the lingering looks. The ambiguity had reached its breaking point. The bubble was about to burst. He finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, rough with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Leo," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes searching my face for something, an answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. This is okay? Us. Like this. The question was a lifeline and a precipice. He was giving me an out. I could have laughed it off, said, "Of course, man. We're best friends." I could have preserved the status quo, retreated to the safety of our established roles. It would have been the sensible thing to do. But looking into his tormented eyes, I saw my own fear and longing reflected back at me. For years, I had been the quiet observer, the one who documented life from a safe distance. I had built fortress walls around my heart to protect it. But in that moment, I realized that safety was just another word for loneliness. To be safe was to be alone, and I was so tired of being alone. I took a breath, a shaky, uncertain thing. "Yes," I whispered, the word feeling enormous, a declaration of intent. "It's okay." A wave of relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost tangible. But it was immediately followed by a fresh wave of apprehension. He leaned in closer, the space between us shrinking until there was none left. His breath was warm on my cheek. His eyes were locked on my lips now, and my entire world narrowed to that single point of focus. My heart was a thunderous roar in my ears. This was the moment of exposure, the click of the shutter on a photo that could never be undeveloped. "Would it be okay?" he breathed, his voice trembling slightly, the words hanging between us, fragile and momentous. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" There it was. Not a demand, not an assumption. A question, a request for permission. It was an act of profound vulnerability, an offering of his own uncertainty laid bare. He was giving me all the power, the power to accept or reject, the power to define this moment. In that question, he was admitting that this was not just about comfort, not just about a warm place to sleep. It was about more. It was about this. It was about me. All the years of silent pining, of carefully managed hope and crushing disappointment, coalesced into this single, terrifying, beautiful point in time. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a feeling so vast and overwhelming it felt like flying. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. It was enough. He closed the final inch between us. The first touch of his lips to mine was impossibly soft, tentative, a question in itself. It was not the kiss of a confident, experienced man. It was the hesitant, discovery-filled kiss of someone stepping into a new world for the first time. It was hesitant, searching, and filled with a universe of unspoken things. I responded in kind, my own fears and longings pouring into that simple point of contact. My hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, came up to cup his face, my thumbs tracing the line of his jaw. It was a kiss that felt less like passion and more like a confession, a mutual admission of a truth we had both been too terrified to speak aloud. It was the sound of a door quietly, finally, clicking shut, with both of us on the same side. The world outside that moment, outside the circle of our arms, ceased to exist. There was only the soft pressure of his lips, the scent of his skin, and the overwhelming, earth-shattering feeling of being, at long last, truly seen. The aftermath of a cataclysm is always quiet. The storm passes, the earth stops shaking, and what is left is a profoundly altered landscape, silent and still under a changed sky. The morning after the kiss was exactly that, a deafening silence. I woke up alone. The space beside me in the bed was cold, the indentation of his body already fading from the sheets. For a moment, a disoriented, sleepy panic seized me. Had I dreamed it? Had my own desperate longing finally conjured a phantom moment of connection so real that it felt like a memory? But then I saw it. On my nightstand, next to my alarm clock, was his key to my apartment. He had left it. The small, brass object sat there like a judgment, a definitive, brutal statement. He was not just gone from my bed. He was gone from my life, and he had left the key to the wreckage behind. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, flooded my system, chasing away any lingering warmth from the night before. I had been wrong. I had misread everything. The kiss had not been a confession. It had been a mistake. A moment of confused, lonely impulse on his part that he now deeply regretted. I had been a temporary lapse in judgment, a port in a storm that he had fled at first light. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I had let him in. I had let him see the secret room in my heart, and he had taken one look and run, leaving the door swinging open in his wake. The carefully constructed walls I had lived behind for years now lay in ruins around me, and I felt exposed, foolish, and utterly, devastatingly alone. I spent the day in a haze of misery, moving through my apartment like a ghost. Every object seemed to mock me. The blanket on the couch, the extra mug in the dish rack, the very air in the bedroom that still held the faint scent of him. They were all artifacts from a life that no longer existed, a friendship I had single-handedly destroyed by daring to want more. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, searching for the moment I had gotten it so wrong. His vulnerability, his tentative question, had I imagined it? Had I projected my own feelings onto him so completely that I saw what I wanted to see, not what was actually there? The quiet observer had failed. My lens had been distorted by my own desire. His text came late in the afternoon, a small, jarring buzz on the coffee table that made me jump. For a heart-stopping second, hope flared. But the message itself was a bucket of ice water. Hey, had to head out early. Big meeting got moved up. I'm sorry about last night. It was confusing. Not beautiful, not momentous, not life-changing. Confusing. And then the final, gut-wrenching line. I think I need some space. The word was a guillotine. He was severing the connection, putting an ocean of distance between his confusion and my catastrophic hope. I did not reply. What was there to say? I had been reduced to a moment of confusion, an awkward incident to be apologized for, and then forgotten. The friendship was broken, and the fragile, burgeoning thing I had mistaken for love was dead before it had even drawn a breath. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. The silence from him was absolute. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt like a prison, each room echoing with his absence. The quiet I had once cherished now felt empty, suffocating. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of my camera, but my focus was gone. I looked through the viewfinder and saw nothing but a gray, joyless world. Alex had been the color, the light, the vibrant energy in the composition of my life, and without him, everything was flat, desaturated, and meaningless. I was angry at him for his carelessness, for his emotional cowardice, for starting something he had no intention of finishing. But mostly, I was angry at myself. Angry for my weakness, for my foolish, hopeful heart, for risking the one thing that had mattered most to me for a kiss that had apparently meant nothing. After a week of this agonizing silence, something inside me shifted. The hurt and humiliation began to curdle into a different kind of anger, a colder, harder resolve. I was not just a passive observer in this story. I was not just a convenient comfort object to be used and discarded. His confusion was his problem, but his silence, his cowardice, was now mine. He had asked me a question in that hallway, "Do I make you nervous?" And in doing so, had opened a door. He did not get to run away and pretend it never happened. He did not get to leave me alone in the ruins. I deserved more than an apology for confusion. I deserved an explanation. I deserved the truth, no matter how painful. The fear of losing him was still there, a constant, low hum of dread, but it was now eclipsed by the need for closure, for some kind of honest resolution to the chaos he had created. I found his new address through a mutual friend. He had finally gotten his own place, a sterile corporate apartment in a high-rise downtown, a move he had been putting off for months. He had been using my place as a crutch, I realized with a fresh pang of bitterness, a way to avoid putting down his own roots. With a grim, determined knot in my stomach, I drove there. I did not call first. I knew if I did, he would make an excuse. This had to be a confrontation, not a conversation he could evade. Standing outside his anonymous apartment door, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic echo of how I had felt in my own hallway what felt like a lifetime ago. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened, and there he was. He looked terrible. He was still in his work clothes, his tie loosened, his shirt rumpled. The weariness I had seen in him before was back, but now it was etched deeper into his face, a permanent part of his features. When he saw me, his eyes widened, first with shock, and then with a deep, gut-wrenching guilt. He looked like a cornered animal. He tried to plaster on a semblance of his old, easygoing smile, but it was a pathetic, flimsy thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Leo," he said, his voice hoarse. "Hey, what are you doing here? You left your key," I said, my voice flat, holding it up between my thumb and forefinger. I didn't move to hand it to him, and I wanted an answer to my question. He looked confused. "Your question? What question?" "The one I didn't get to ask," I said, stepping past him into the apartment, forcing him to back away. The place was barely lived in. Boxes were still stacked against one wall. It had none of the warmth or personality of my home. It was a hotel room he happened to own. I turned to face him, backing him towards the center of the sterile, empty living room. I was tired of being the one backed into a corner. "The night you asked if you made me nervous. The night you kissed me. The night you told me it was confusing and then disappeared. I have a question for you, Alex. What the hell was that?" He flinched as if I had struck him. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, avoiding my eyes. "Leo, I told you. I'm sorry. I don't know. I was tired, I was stressed. I wasn't thinking straight. It was a mistake. A mistake." I repeated, the word tasting like poison. The cold anger that had propelled me here was rising, hot and sharp. Sleeping in my bed for months was a mistake? The way you held on to me every single night, was that a mistake too? Or was the only mistake kissing me? Was that the part that finally crossed a line for you? "I don't know," he finally exploded, his voice cracking with a desperation that stunned me into silence. He looked at me, his eyes wild with fear and a raw, painful honesty. "I don't know, Leo. Okay. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't feel this way about people. About men. It doesn't make any sense. I lie in bed next to you, and it feels more right than anything in my entire life. It feels like coming home. And it terrifies me. I kissed you because I couldn't not kiss you. I felt like if I didn't, I would just shatter into a million pieces. And the second I did it, the second it was real, I panicked. Because I don't know what it means. I don't know who I am if that's who I am. His confession, ragged and broken, hung in the air between us, sucking all the oxygen from the room. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He was not a coward. He was just lost. He was standing on the edge of the same cliff I had lived on for years, terrified of the fall. All his life, he had followed a map, a clear path laid out for him. School, sports, business, girlfriends. He was Alex, the golden boy, the straight man. And this feeling for me, this undeniable, magnetic pull, was a deviation from that map, a journey into a wilderness for which he had no compass. His running away was not a rejection of me. It was a rejection of a part of himself he did not understand and was terrified to face. I closed the space between us, not with anger this time, but with a quiet gentleness. I took his hand. His fingers were cold, and they trembled in mine. "So you ran?" I said softly, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "You ran from me because you're scared of yourself." He wouldn't look at me, but he squeezed my hand, a desperate, clinging pressure. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. "I'm so sorry, Leo," he whispered. "I hurt you. I took this amazing, perfect thing we have, our friendship, and I broke it. I'm so sorry." "You didn't break it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I used my other hand to gently turn his face towards me. I made him meet my gaze. "It's been bent out of shape for a long time, Alex. At least for me. You just finally noticed." I took a deep, shaky breath. It was my turn to be honest. My turn to be brave. "I have been in love with you for years. That's my truth. And it's okay if you're not there. It's okay if you're confused and scared. But you don't get to run. You don't get to disappear. You can be scared with me. You can be confused with me. Whatever this is, we have to figure it out together. Or we walk away together. But you don't get to leave me alone in the rubble to figure it out by myself." He stared at me, his eyes wide, the tears now flowing freely. He saw the truth of my words, the years of my own fear and longing that I had just laid at his feet. He saw that I was not judging him, but offering him a hand to hold in the dark. He let out a ragged sob, a sound of such profound grief and relief that it broke my heart. And he collapsed against me, his arms wrapping around me, holding on as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. I held him back, my own tears finally falling, mourning the years we had lost to fear and silence, and celebrating the terrifying, beautiful, uncertain future that had just, finally, begun. We stood there for a long time, two broken, terrified, hopeful men, clinging to each other in the sterile emptiness of his new apartment, finally ready to navigate the wilderness together. The aftermath of the confrontation was not a sudden, magical resolution. There were no grand declarations, no immediate certainty. Instead, it was the beginning of a slow, careful process of healing, like the painstaking work of piecing together a shattered vase. We began to talk, truly talk, for the first time. We spent that entire night on the floor of his empty apartment, surrounded by his unpacked life, and we unburdened ourselves of years of unspoken truths. He talked about the suffocating pressure to be the person everyone expected him to be, the gnawing loneliness of his transient life, and the bewildering, undeniable sense of peace he only ever felt with me. He admitted that the casual intimacy in my bed had started as a simple need for comfort, but had slowly morphed into something he craved, something he needed, a feeling he had been too afraid to name. I, in turn, confessed the full landscape of my love for him. I told him about the years of quiet observation, the ache of watching him with other people, the terror I felt at the thought of losing our friendship. I explained how every moment of his unconscious affection had been both a gift and a torment. It was a raw, painful, and utterly necessary conversation. We laid all our cards on the table, all our fears and vulnerabilities exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of his kitchen. By the time the sun began to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, we were exhausted, emotionally flayed. But a new foundation had been laid between us, one built not on assumptions and plausible deniability, but on a brutal, beautiful honesty. He asked me to stay, not to sleep, not to cuddle, but just to be there. We didn't share the bed. I took the couch in his new apartment, and he took his bed, a deliberate, symbolic act of resetting our physical boundaries to rebuild them with intention. It was a strange reversal of our old dynamic. The space between us was no longer charged with unspoken longing, but with a quiet, deliberate respect. We were learning a new language, one where closeness had to be asked for, consented to, and understood. The next morning, he made me coffee, a simple, domestic act that felt more profound than any passionate kiss. As he handed me the mug, his fingers brushed against mine, and he met my eyes, a question in them. I held his gaze and gently squeezed his hand, a silent answer. Yes, this is okay. Alex decided to take a leave of absence from his job. He said he needed to stop running, not just from his feelings for me, but from himself. He needed to be still for a while and figure out what he actually wanted, not what his company or his family or the world expected of him. He stayed in his apartment, and I stayed in mine, but we spent our days together. We went on long walks, exploring the city not as a backdrop for our lives, but as a place to simply be. We talked about everything and nothing. It was a period of gentle courtship, a strange and wonderful inversion of our history. We were best friends getting to know each other as something new, something more. The physical intimacy returned slowly, tentatively, and with intention. It started with holding hands while we walked, a simple act that felt monumental. It progressed to him leaning his head on my shoulder while we watched a movie on my couch, the same couch he had once used as a barrier. This time, it felt different. It was not an act of unconscious seeking, it was a choice. One evening, after a long, quiet day, he turned to me and simply asked, "Can I kiss you again?" The question was soft, filled with the memory of our first, chaotic kiss and the painful aftermath. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and said, "Yes, this kiss was different." It was calm, certain, and deeply reassuring. It was a promise, not a question. Eventually, he moved back into my apartment, not as a guest crashing between trips, but as a resident. We packed up the boxes in his sterile high-rise together, a symbolic dismantling of the life he was leaving behind. The first night he was officially living with me, a familiar tension settled as bedtime approached. We stood in the hallway, the same hallway where he had first asked if he made me nervous. He looked at the closed door to my bedroom, then at me, a flicker of the old uncertainty in his eyes. I saw his fear, the muscle memory of his panic. I stepped forward and took his hand, lacing my fingers with his. I led him to the bedroom door, opened it, and then turned to him. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, waiting. He understood. This was his choice. After a long moment, a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. He squeezed my hand, stepped across the threshold with me, and gently pulled the door closed behind us, the soft click of the latch a definitive, final sound. There were no more pretexts, no more ambiguities. We were home. Life found a new rhythm, a quiet, steady beat. The grand, operatic drama of our unspoken feelings was replaced by the gentle prose of daily life. We learned the small intimacies of cohabitation, the way he liked his coffee, the way I left my camera lenses on the dining table, the shared chore of laundry. These mundane details were the architecture of our new life, each one a small brick in the foundation of our shared future. My apartment, which had once been just my sanctuary, became our sanctuary. His laughter filled its rooms again, not the loud, performative laugh of his old life, but a softer, more genuine sound. The light had returned to his eyes, but it was a different kind of light, not the dazzling glare of the sun, but the warm, steady glow of a hearth. My photography changed, too. For years, my work had been a study in serene, beautiful loneliness. It was about capturing the quiet spaces, the moments between moments. Now, I found myself drawn to capturing connection. I took photos of him, not posed or formal, but candid shots of him reading on the couch, his face relaxed in concentration, of him cooking, a dusting of flour on his cheek, of his hand resting on my knee as we sat in a park. My lens was no longer a barrier to keep the world at a distance. It was a tool to celebrate the world I had finally allowed myself to be a part of. One of my favorite photos from that time is a simple one. It is a close-up of our hands, intertwined on the rumpled sheets of our bed, the morning light tracing the lines of our fingers. It is a photograph about peace, about safety, about the silent, profound language of touch. We never forgot the pain that led us here. The memory of his key on my nightstand, of his panicked flight, of the raw confrontation in his empty apartment. They were part of our story, the scars that proved the wound had been real. But they were no longer open wounds. They were a reminder of how far we had come, of the fear we had overcome. Sometimes, when he would see a flicker of anxiety in my eyes, he would pull me close and whisper, "I'm not going anywhere," and I believed him. His presence was no longer a tide, pulling in and out. It was the steady, solid ground beneath my feet. We learned that love is not always a sudden, brilliant flash of lightning. Sometimes, it is a slow dawn, a gradual illumination of a truth that has been there all along. It is the quiet courage to ask a terrifying question, and the even quieter courage to stay for the answer. It is the process of unlearning fear, of dismantling the walls we build to protect ourselves, and realizing that the greatest safety is not in solitude, but in a shared vulnerability. It is in the simple, profound peace of closing a door with the person you love, knowing you are both, finally, on the right side. We had found our way out of the confusing silence and into a beautiful, honest quiet, a space where we no longer needed to ask what it all meant. We were simply living the answer, together.